Hello everyone, this is Brian TechFS here, and today I thought we'd go ahead and do a video explaining the difference between European Vatsim and North American Vatsim, as for someone who maybe only flies North American Vatsim, they can rack up plenty of hours and become very, very experienced in North American Vatsim, but then come over here and make every imaginable mistake, right? The two are very different, and so today I thought we'd go ahead and do a video explaining the differences between these two sectors of Vatsim. We're not going to touch on the rest of the world because I don't exactly know what the rest of the world is like. I mainly only fly European and North American Vatsim, so we'll at least touch on that. We're not going to touch on oceanic stuff either, as that can get very complicated very fast. That is a different topic for a different video, because there's enough content there to talk about. But anyway, let's go ahead and get into it. Let's start at the beginning of any good flight. Your pre-departure clearance. Okay, over here in the US and Canada, you are going to get an ACARS or an auto ATC message. If you do not get either of these, restart vPilot or disconnect, reconnect. You'll most likely get one. If you still don't have one, just go. You're fine. This ACARS message here, it'll give you everything you need to know. It'll give you your altitude, your squawk. Right, this is your normal pre-departure clearance. This auto ATC message here is mainly there in case ATC is not online, right? It'll give you a squawk. You need to squawk that code, like you would squawk this code here, right? But that's the difference. Over in Europe, if you're not familiar, you do it via either CPDLC, which we'll get to that in a moment, or voice. And if there's no ATC online, you just go. Okay, let's go ahead and quickly talk about Unicom and CTAF. First off, what is a CTAF frequency? Well, a CTAF frequency is the equivalent of a tower frequency, right? So you communicate takeoff and landings on it. You communicate push and start. If there's no ATC online, right? You communicate taxi, right? But how do you find these CTAF frequencies? Of course, you still do use Unicom after you land, or after you take off, right? At a certain altitude, usually around 3,000 feet, switch over back to Unicom, right? But where do you find these CTAF frequencies? Well, if there's only one tower frequency listed on your charts, it'll be the tower. It'll be that tower frequency. So for Baltimore, it is 109.4, right? For airports like Boston, where they might have multiple tower frequencies, then they'll say CTAF whatever up here. Or there's another way to find it, and that is through the command for vPilot, which is simply just .CTAF and the ICAO code for the airport, right? So for Boston, it would be .CTAF KBOS, and it'll spit out vPilot will spit out a message saying the CTAF frequency for Boston is blah blah blah. And I do just want to add a little note on to what I just said there, and that is, I would still monitor Unicom 122.8 in case someone is maybe not familiar with the CTAF rules. I would still tune that on, right, and it also allows you to hear what's going on in the air while you start up your aircraft, right? But of course, all your transmissions when you're on the ground, when you're within like a 5-mile radius of the airport, should be on CTAF. I just want to come back here and make a quick little point on push and start. Okay, now sometimes this will say contact ATC for taxi. Other times, like this one, it'll say contact ATC for push. It is always recommended that you contact ATC for push, right? As sometimes they have it set up wrong. Sometimes they expect you to. Sometimes it'll say contact ATC for taxi, but they'll expect you to contact them for push, right? always contact them for push, and if they say it's at your discretion, well, at least you know you've done your due diligence in asking. I just want to quickly make a note here on CPDLC. For those who don't know what CPDLC is, you can either skip ahead or go watch another video explaining on what CPDLC is. But for those of us who do know what it is, it's important to note that most, if not all, controllers in the US will never use CPDLC. I don't know what the reason is there for that. However, if you go up to Canada, then they will. Okay. Of course, you can always verify through Vatsim if a controller uses CPDLC. I think even Vatsim Radar will say on it. However, in the US, even though it says on the charts, they do not use CPDLC. Let's take a moment to talk about descent in the US versus the UK and EU. Okay. Over in the EU and the UK, they don't have what is known as descend via. Okay. What do I mean by descend via? Well, in the US, an air traffic controller will tell you, let's say you're arriving in Baltimore, descend via the Raven 8 arrival. Okay. And you are expected to descend to all these altitudes listed. Okay, these are much more complex charts. It's important you know how to read them. Okay, but you are expected to descend to all these altitudes, meet them without any controller communication. Okay, rather over in the EU and in the UK, they'll tell you, look, I want you flight level 200 level by Tobin, flight level 150 level by Soppit. These are really more for guidance, right? I mean, of course, you still are expected to fly to these waypoints unless told otherwise, but these altitudes over in the EU and in the UK, they're kinda not really that important. They're more for guidance for where you can expect to end up. However, over here in the US, these altitudes are mandatory if you are told to descend via an arrival. Okay, it's important to know this because failing to descend via an arrival is a violation of Vatsim code of conduct. Okay, if you can't fly the arrival for any reason, you need to let a controller know, because if you do not, they can report you to the Vatsim moderators. Alright, and I think that just about wraps it up here. Thank you all so much for tuning in. I hope this video gave you a bit more of an overview on how to fly over here in North America. Okay, I mean, hopefully it provides you with a bit more information, right? Out of all the information that I've given you, if you were to apply your European knowledge and to North America, you'll be just fine. Okay. This is very broad. Of course, there are a few more differences, right? Usually I find that the controllers are a little nicer over here. Okay. The other one last thing I will say to note is sometimes controllers over here will be on multiple frequencies, right? And so sometimes they're talking to people and you can't exactly hear them or hear who's talking back. So just keep that in mind when you're talking to the guys over here. Not every controller is like that. Just watch out for that. Okay. But I do hope that this video gave you a bit more of an overview on North American Vatsim, and for anyone who maybe is very used to North American Vatsim, hope you learned a little bit for European Vatsim. Alright, thank you all so much for tuning in, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye.